Welcome to the Creative Penn podcast. I'm Joanna Penn, thriller author and creative entrepreneur, bringing you interviews, inspiration and information on writing, publishing options and marketing ideas for your book. You can find the episode show notes, your free author blueprint and lots more information at thecreativepenn.com, and that's Penn with a double N. And here's the show. Hello creatives, I'm Joanna Penn and this is episode number 472 of the podcast, and it is Friday 17th of January 2020 as I record this. So today I'm talking with Kate Harrison about pitch power, and it is a super useful interview, whatever you write. And Kate has a background in television, but she also writes novels and non-fiction, and she's a hybrid author, like she's super talented in all these areas. And she knows all about pitching agents, publishers and TV executives for show ideas. As well as, because she also publishes independently, she also knows how to write blurbs and book descriptions to pitch your book to readers. Because this is the truth, creatives, we have to pitch our book however we publish. It just depends who we're pitching to, but some of these principles are consistent. Also, Kate talks about how we can use the pitch to strengthen our book ideas before we even write the book. And this is a challenge for someone like me because I'm a discovery writer, and it depends what kind of writer you are. But I tend to, it kind of bubbles up and then I write it and then I figure out what it is at the end, which is how I can't write to market for fiction. And I basically just bimble along, writing what the muse says and having a good time. But I know that this is an area I need to strengthen. So I found this interview fascinating, and I know you're going to find it useful. Whatever stage you are in your career, however you write, whether you want to be traditionally published or independent, this is really useful. So that is coming up. In publishing and book marketing news this week, good news for audiobooks. You know how bullish I am on audiobooks. So FindawayVoices announces new promotional pricing tools. So you can submit pricing promotions to Chirp and also to Apple through their interface. So essentially, and again, this is in beta right now, but this is going to be available a bit like on Kobo Writing Life for promos there. So I've got access and I've submitted books. Now, in the past, you could apply for promotions, but it was more like spreadsheets and enter your number here, and it was a bit clunky. But now it's more like the Kobo Writing Life side, where there's a tab for marketing and you go in and you submit your book. And basically how I deal with this type of marketing is I just apply every single month for everything I can and hope that something gets through. I have had emails from people saying, I try the Kobo Writing Life promotions and I don't get accepted every time. And it's like, well, that's life. It's not, you don't get accepted every time for these things, but you have to keep submitting. So I have also heard from BookBub about ads for audiobook listeners. So I'm going to start that beta as well. So these are really good signs that the audiobook promotion market is starting to get somewhere. A good reason to go wide with audiobooks is being able to do this kind of promotional pricing, because with ACX, you don't control your price. So with FindawayVoices, you can control your price, and then you can do promotional pricing. So I am obviously continuing to push for Chirp Books and Authors Direct for selling audio direct to go global and not just be US centric. But obviously it takes time to spread into other markets. But hopefully we will see that happen, as we've seen with other software over time. Basically, I would say we're around sort of 2010 for audiobook. If you look at the development of ebooks, if you listen to the podcast a couple of weeks ago with Orna Ross about the last decade with mainly digital ebooks, print on demand, and the start of audio, but it feels like 2010 in terms of the ecosystem for audiobook marketing is still not very developed as yet, but we are getting there. And FindawayVoices and Chirp, which is a BookBub service, is doing well at forging ahead. So that is exciting. I'll link to the post in the show notes, but it's the Findaway Voices blog, which is great to subscribe to if you are wide with audio. So in personal stuff, basically I am, so I've got the line edits back, the proofreading final pass on audio for authors. So I'm updating each chapter with the proofread. Then I also put it through Grammarly because I think Grammarly picks up different things around word choice, which is really interesting, which is not necessarily picked up on a proofread because it's correct. It just could be better. And then I'm narrating each chapter for audio. Now, what's really interesting, this is the first book I've really written specifically with the audiobook in mind. So the one before this, Productivity for Authors, I used the transcripts of a course to turn that into a draft for a book, and then I edited the draft and then I recorded the audiobook. But this book I have written with audio in mind, and boy, is it going so much faster. My narration is much smoother because it's easier to narrate because I've written it with audio in mind. So I'm really excited about that because there is a chapter in the book about writing for audio, and I really feel like it's working and it's coming through. So very cool. I am aiming to finish the narration by the end of January. So hard at work in the sound booth. And of course, in Audio for Authors, subtitle, audiobooks, podcasting and voice technologies, I links to everything I do in my entire process. So that will be useful. Still on pre-order. If you're interested. It's kind of annoying because you can't do a pre-order for audiobooks. And you can do some for print books, but because I don't do my print formatting until I've finished narrating now, because once I've narrated, I do make little changes because when I'm narrating, I'm like, I think I'll change that. It will sound better if I do it this way. And so I wait till I've got the entire manuscript recorded, and then that's kind of set in stone. So it's interesting how my process has changed over time. But yeah, to be honest, I'm really proud of this book. It feels very important to me. I hope it's useful for you. But it feels like a decade's worth of learning in this book. So yeah, I'm really proud of it actually. So I hope it's useful. It's good though, isn't it, to be proud of what we create and part of our body of work and being useful for some people, but also embedding what we've learned in our writing is such an important part of the process. Okay, talking of writing, winding the process back, I start my writing process in Scrivener, and I've now written over 30 books with Scrivener. It is my first choice writing software. I did write my first novel in Word, and so I must have written my first non-fiction books in Word as well, but boy, Scrivener just makes everything much easier. So I take it all the way through to the end of the first major edit in Scrivener, and then I move into Vellum. So basically, we are doing a Scrivener webinar because I get so many emails from people and they say, I know you use Scrivener, but it's just, I find it a bit difficult to use. And how is it really good software? So Joseph Michael, the Scrivener coach, is coming back to do a webinar on how you can get Scrivener to do exactly what you want and accelerate your writing career in less than an hour. And Joe does a great webinar on Scrivener. I still learn something every time. So what we'll do on the webinar is I will do the first couple of minutes and I will show you what I do on Scrivener, and then Joe will do a tutorial where you actually see how to use Scrivener from the very basics. So if you know how to use Scrivener, like the first 10 minutes of Joe's stuff will be a bit basic. If you know nothing, you'll go from zero to knowing what to do. But even if you're an advanced level Scrivener user, I betcha you will learn something. So I always learn something from Joe. So this webinar will be on Thursday. Apparently I sound very West Country sometimes. Thursday, the 30th of January at 3 p.m. US Eastern, 8 p.m. UK. As ever, register for your free place and you'll get the replay. at thecreativepenn.com/Jan30, so JAN30, links in the show notes. So that is free webinar on Scrivener, Thursday 30th of January. Come and join us, thecreativepenn.com/Jan30. And yes, it's learning time of the year, webinar-tastic. But this is such a good one. I know this is a popular one. So yeah, come join us. So thanks for all your emails and tweets and comments on the show. The Near Eyal podcast certainly struck a few chords in terms of escaping distraction. Robin Sati says, listening to the show while renovating my office, oh, how today's episode spoke to me. First time I've ever re-listened to a podcast as soon as I finished. The antidote for distraction is forethought. Thank you so much for this interview. I'm so glad it was that useful, Robin. That's amazing. So super. And Diana Gunn says, listening to The Creative Penn and as a freelance non-fiction writer by day and fantasy author by night, I 100% agree that fiction is harder because you have to make decisions for your characters and also sit in their discomfort. Yeah, and if you haven't listened to that episode yet, Nia and I talk about, the fact that writing fiction is harder, and I said it's because we have to make so many decisions. You just all the time, partly we get tired in our normal real life because we have to make decisions about everything. But when you're writing fiction, you're making decisions for other people, which can also be quite tiring. Okay. And then Casey Julius says, just finished listening to the Reflections podcast 466 on the past decade in indie publishing. For someone just starting out with my debut indie release, it's a great overview and perspective on how far we've come. I'm so glad you found that useful, Casey. And yeah, starting out, this is the thing. People always say, oh, wasn't it easier to start out a decade ago? It's like, well, no, to be honest, because we had no infrastructure, no ecosystem. And, a decade ago, I couldn't even publish on KDP as an international author. So, you have to look at the pros and cons. But, things change all the time and new opportunities arise. Things that used to work don't work anymore, and we all move on. But together, we are surfing the wave. So today's show is sponsored by Ingram Spark. I'm going to play a little message from Robin Cutler from Ingram in a minute. But before we get into that, just wanted to say that I use Ingram Spark to go wide with my print books. And this is really important. I've had quite a few emails. People say, oh, but I'm in KU. How do I use Ingram? So KU is only for ebooks. So even if you want to be exclusive for your ebooks, you can be wide with your print books and your audiobooks. So you can use Ingram. Basically, if you don't use Ingram, you cannot reach bookstores, libraries, and other sales outlets that need a discount for their business model. So basically, how I work is I publish on KDP Print and Ingram Spark with the same ISBN. And in that way, I get to sell books, on Amazon, but also I get to sell into bookstores and libraries. And as I mentioned last week, someone's spotted books in libraries in the wild. I've spotted my own books in bookstores, which is kind of cool. Plus just this week, I did a bulk order to a bookstore in Michigan because of Ingram Spark. And if you do live events, you can also do bulk discounts on like boxes of books and stuff. So it's super useful. And Robin is going to have a message in a minute, but you can also use, so the promo code, if you want to get started with Ingram Spark, there is a title upload fee, but you can get it free by using promo code NANO2020, so NANO 2020 before March 31st, 2020, and you get free title upload on print books, or ebooks, or both with Ingram Spark. So I only use Ingram Spark for print. I do paperbacks, I do hardbacks, which you can't even do on KDP Print. I do large print. So they are a fantastic service. I love having my books wide. So that is cool. and a word coming up from Robin in a minute. Before we get into that, this type of corporate sponsorship pays for the hosting, transcription and editing of the show, but my time is sponsored by my wonderful patrons. Thank you to everyone supporting the show on Patreon. I was having a conversation the other day with a fellow podcaster who's been podcasting also for a very, very long time, and we were talking about the things that keep us going. And I mentioned Patreon. I said, to be honest, every single day somebody new starts sponsoring the podcast, and even the extra couple of dollars a month is very well appreciated. It's also the emotional support and the knowledge that the show is useful, because the self-doubt, I suffer from it just as much as everyone else. Oh my goodness. Anyway, thanks to everyone supporting this show. Clearly, I've had a difficult week. So thanks to everyone supporting the show on Patreon. Thanks to new patrons, Kelly Flanagan, Asha Harkness, Lena Maria, Jamie DJ Shepherd, Keith Ryans, Connor Whiteley and Ektar Barley. I really appreciate your support on Patreon. Like the tweets and emails, it demonstrates you enjoy the show and want it to continue. You can support the show with just a couple of dollars a month and you'll get the extra monthly Q&A audio, including the backlist. So if you want more audio from me, you can get it by joining the Patreon at patreon.com. patreon.com/The Creative Penn. And yes, I need to do the Q&A this week, promise. Right, here's a word from the lovely Robin from Ingram Spark, and then we'll get into the interview.
Hi, everyone. I'm Robin Cutler, Director of Ingram Spark, an award-winning independent publishing platform that offers authors, including Joanna Penn, a way to publish and distribute print and ebooks to over 39,000 online and physical booksellers and libraries worldwide. The new year always brings about resolutions, and if you're listening to the Creative Penn podcast, one of yours may be to write and publish your book this year. If so, we hope you'll consider making Ingram Spark part of your publishing journey. With dozens of trim sizes, color, hardcovers, paperbacks, ebooks, global distribution, along with free publisher education to help you succeed, Ingram Spark believes it's your content. We just help you do more with it. Do more with your book this year when you get started at www.ingramspark.com.
Kate Harrison is the best-selling author of 13 novels and 7 non-fiction books, which have sold over 1 million copies and been translated into 25 languages. She was formerly a TV producer at the BBC, and her latest book is Pitch Power: Discover what makes your book irresistible and how to sell it. Welcome to the show, Kate.
Thank you, Joanna. I am so excited to be here because I listen to the podcast every week. It's going to be quite freaky being here as a guest.
Well, I'm glad to have you on the show because, of course, you are incredibly well published in many ways. But we're not going to talk about publishing today. We're talking about this book on pitching, which is fantastic. But before we do, just tell us a bit more about you and how you got into writing in the first place.
So I absolutely loved writing as a kid, but being an author wasn't a real job, not the kind of thing anyone I knew did. So I became a journalist and then a TV reporter and producer. And then I finally entered what I call my beanbag days, which were developing new ideas for programmes at the BBC. So kind of sitting around, doing ideas, showers, the whole caboodle. But the writing bug definitely didn't leave. And I wrote in my spare time and had my first novel conventionally published back in 2003. That was a comedy about a nasty school reunion. And then I've written across the genres ever since. I'm really hard to define. So I've done a YA trilogy, thrillers, women's fiction. I indie published the 5-2 diet book on Kindle in 2012, helped by your podcast and some other authors that I knew were doing it. And that gave me a whole different career as an accidental diet guru. So now I'm a bit of a hybrid. I do what interests me at the time, and I work out on a project by project basis whether I'm going to go with conventional publishing, as I did for a book that's going to come out in a couple of years, just sold that, or do what I've done with Pitch Power, which is to sell it so I can keep that creative control.
Well, I'm going to ask you about this then, because that's really interesting. So you talked about developing new ideas for TV, and of course, each of those ideas would have had a different route to market. And the way you're talking about books is the same thing. But how do you decide this book would be good indie, this book would be good traditional?
It's a mixture of factors depending on where I see the market going and what my expectations are for the book. So in the case of the first book that I did, the diet book, that had nothing to do with making a choice. It was just my existing publisher said, no, we don't think you're an authority on this. We don't think we can sell the book. And having planned it already, I thought, well, you know, Kindle was coming up. I knew friends who'd done it. I'd listened to you. And I thought, well, I'll give it a go. And it went on to sell all over the place, more than my novels, did incredibly well. And after that, I just saw that freedom of opportunity. Partly it's to do with a niche. So a book about pitching for authors is not going to have a huge potential audience, but it's hopefully going to have a really engaged one. Whereas the book that I sold over the summer, that's coming out in 2 years, that's sold in America, it's sold in the UK to conventional publishers all over the world, because I guess it's got a little bit more mainstream appeal, and because it's a novel that I would really like to see in the bookshops, it's much easier for them to do mass market distribution. And I'm really excited about both ways. I love doing it both ways.
I think that's a great way of looking at it. And obviously you've been building your career for a long time. So you've put yourself into the place where you have those choices as well. And I think that's really important. But let's get into the pitch book. So people listening, you know, a lot of indie authors. So why is it important to know how to pitch your book, even if you decide to go the indie route? Because the pitch isn't just relevant to pitching publishers and agents. It is actually the key to knowing how to reach your ideal readers. And when people hear about pitch, they think, oh, it's the hard sell. It's the total opposite as far as I'm concerned. It's about really getting to understand your book's DNA, what it offers, and then working out how to express it in the most enticing way possible. And then you can make those decisions I was talking about how to publish it, and at every stage. So the process of coming up with a pitch means understanding things like genre. If you're writing a novel, it's pinpointing that central story question that people will like. If it's non-fiction, it's the need that you're meeting. But where I differ, I think, from perhaps some very hard sell versions of pitching is looking into the emotional benefits. How does your reader really feel when they're reading the book, and how do they feel after they've finished? And once you've worked that out, it can influence everything, your book descriptions, but also all your other decisions. So things like title, cover, the categories you put things into. And this benefit thing, it's something that came from my work in TV, really. We really wanted to understand what the viewer was experiencing and why they might choose one channel at one time of day and one kind of program. And you can see that is starting to come into publishing. So I don't know if you've noticed, but on UK Amazon, you get a lot more subtitles now, which are telling us things like the most suspenseful, unputdownable thriller in 2020, or there was a big hit on both sides of the Atlantic one day in December that was called the heartwarming and uplifting bestseller that everyone's falling in love with. These are not in the title, but they are telling the reader what they want to expect. And I think for so long, publishers assumed that there are a group of pure thriller readers over here, and there's a group of pure romance readers over there. And while that might be true, I think there's loads in the middle who have different moods and different needs at different times, and they want a signal from you as an indie author or from a publisher that they're going to get what they want at that time if they invest their time and their money in the book. And there's one final point, actually, which is that if you get it wrong, if you haven't sussed out the pitch, we all know that there is no reader so angry as a reader scorned who feels that they've been missold a book. It's a waste of time more than money, and they will go on the review sites and they will really go to town on your book. Whereas if you get it right, you've got a lifelong fan. Yeah, wow, there's so much in there. But I do want to just comment on those subtitles because, of course, that is against the Amazon terms of service and something indies get very upset about because they don't seem to police it for traditional publishers. But it is a rule on Amazon. If the words are not actually in the official subtitle, they can't be used on that field. So I don't know if you knew that
I did know that, and I have no idea how they get away with it, but it seems to work for them.
Well,
and I wonder if there's a way that they will develop that.
Yeah, there's definitely been a crackdown for indies. But just apart from that, I think there are pros and cons. Again, I mean, I've also seen backlash against like the twist you will never see coming, which everyone sees coming, and then it gets kind of terrible review. So I think I'm not sure about putting the words on it, but I really like the idea of this emotional benefit. And also because the Google SEO kind of change in search engine and voice search and things is all about search intent. So that really feeds into what you're saying, which is, for example, when things are miserable in the news, people might want that uplifting book. Although personally, I reach for horror.
It's whatever floats your boat where escapism is concerned. I mean, you can still get that emotional benefit across in things like endorsements. It's quite hard to say of your own book, this is the most heartwarming book you've ever read. But if you have another author saying so, that's another way to get intent and get that SEO to pick up on that, I think. Maybe the subtitles won't last, but working out what the benefits are, that is something that can really shape your author career, I think.
And I think you're so right. And it is very difficult. So I had sent you some questions, but I'm just going to jump around because this brings up to me the biggest problem, which is if you're a discovery writer or a pantser, which I am, I tend not to know what's happening in the book. I tend not to know what the emotional promise or the emotional benefit might be until much later in the process. So if people listening are like, yeah, I feel that way too, what can we do before we get into writing that will help us at that later stage?
I think that as soon as you start with an idea, you are beginning to make decisions, and writing a pitch right at the beginning, which is how I always do it, doesn't mean that you're locked into those decisions. But what it does is it starts you as an author, I think, getting in touch with the emotional possibilities and the story possibilities. So first of all, you always want that hook or that story question, the big thing that you're going to get across to your readers, or if you're pitching for a conventional deal to agents and publishers, the thing that is going to entice them in and think, oh, the only way I can answer that story question is to read your book. So that is the first thing that you want to start with. It might be an amazing setting, or it might be a protagonist that you're putting in a really horrible situation. We love to do that, don't we, as writers? Once you've got that in place, then I find that writing a short paragraph or a couple of paragraphs begins to bring up those questions in your head. You start to think, well, what kind of story is this? Where might I see it in a bookshop? Or what kind of feelings might I have around this character? And pretty soon I find, and when I'm working with authors as well, they start to say, well, it's this and it's not that. And you don't have to then be discovering all the twists and turns of the plot. And even though I'm a bit more of a planner than a pantser, I find things change. So I will go back to my pitch as I go through it and think, okay, what's the difference between what I'm writing and what I thought I was setting out to write? And which one feels more true to me? So it's a touchstone. And the other thing it really does for me, writing, having a title and a little thing that is almost starting to make that promise to readers, is also telling me that I can do it. Because even 20 plus books on, the thought of setting out on an 80,000, 100,000 word journey is pretty intense for me. It's a marathon, it's hard going. And just being able to imagine that this is on the back of a book or on a book description in Amazon, somehow it just gives me the motivation to keep going.
So just give us an example of a story question then. I mean, is it the same as like a logline for a movie? Because I find these very, very difficult.
They are quite different. And, the hooks and the story questions, depend very much on genres. So I spoke to a lot of different writers preparing the book, because I have one way of working and different people have different approaches. You've interviewed Simon Toyne yourself brilliantly on the podcast in the past. He wrote the Sanctus trilogy. Like me, he worked in telly, and he put it really well to me. He said that the hook is the question, and then the story and the plot is the answer. So he was writing the novel, and he talks about it in the book, the Solomon Creed, which is his fourth book. And his hook there, and his story question that relates to it, is how do you save someone who is already dead? So that's a nice, open, intriguing question. When you then start getting down into loglines, a logline is much more specific than that. It gives you a sense of who the main character is, what the setting is, and hopefully it includes the hook within there. But when you're looking then at pitching to TV studios or to the movies and similar, a kind of a feelings question, which is what that one Solomon Creed has got there. How do you save someone who's already dead? They want a bit more. And the good thing is you can do these by genre. So rather than me say, here's hundreds, and we could talk about them for hours, search by genre. Find books or movies or TV that are in your kind of genre and see how they do it. There's lots on the Hollywood Reporter, the BBC Writers' Room website, and they will give you, I mean, I did think you might ask this, so I got a couple off of ones which were commissioned from the Hollywood Reporter reporting on them last year. So here's a classic logline. When a former, things called Tommy, coming to our screen soon, when a former high-ranking NYPD officer becomes the first female chief of police for LA, she uses her unflinching honesty and hardball tactics to navigate the social, political, and national security issues that converge with enforcing the law.
Okay. So there's no question there.
There isn't a question, no. Except for maybe there's a question that's kind of got an undercurrent there in terms of what kind of issues are going to come about. What is she going to have to navigate? And especially, where are her unflinching honesty and hardball tactics going to come into conflict with national security issues and the social and political stuff that she's also going into, moving from NY to LA? But you have got, so the logline is a bit more straight, I guess, whereas the story questions will, if you turn that round, it might be, what is she going to do when XYZ thing happens that totally flies in the face of her unflinching honesty and hardball tactics?
No, I think I get so the story question is kind of more the giving the sort of promise, or as you say, that the book will answer the question, but the logline is more about the character, the world, the setting, and I've had people on talking about loglines before. I just wanted to separate out that question to the kind of logline detail. So
because a hook could be anything really. If you look at it, it could be the title. If you have a really fantastic title, then that is the first hook. And I actually see this as part of your seduction of either your reader or your agent. If you're pitching to an agent, you're starting with the title in the subject line of your email that you send, or it's the first thing people see when they search, and they're searching for romantic novels, say. They see the titles, they've never heard of you, but the title begins to hook them in. And then the next line is the next stage of the hook, and it might be this extraordinary setting, or it might be one line. The classic one that I heard over the last year is for the book 13. The serial killer isn't on trial, he's on the jury. So immediately that's a hook. You're coming into that and you really want to know, how is that possible? And that gets you reading the book.
And that, to me, that is a much better subtitle and it is like a hook and a subtitle, because 13 could be anything, but the subtitle there gives it a much better, and obviously it's a crime novel, so that really does give all the signals that you mentioned. And then of course the cover, I know the book you mean, the cover indicates crime as well. So one of the questions that is coming up, and I know we're talking a lot about fiction, for non-fiction people, I feel this is so much easier. I mean, like your book, Pitch Power, discover what makes your book irresistible and how to sell it. I mean, it's a clear need and a promise, and you get that. And in fact, I thought I'd tell you, you sent me an e-copy. I've actually bought the print copy because I think it's so good. So to everyone listening,
thank you.
Definitely put it on your shelf, because it's one of those, I'm sure listeners know, and you've heard me talk about this, I still struggle with this, and this would be the biggest problem. So take someone like me, and I'm looking at some of my books, and I'm going, okay, these get good reviews, but not enough people are finding them. How do I reverse engineer if people listening want to relaunch a book, or redo a series, or redo a tagline or something like that? How can we reverse engineer this into books that are already written?
I think there are two separate things here. You're looking at the book itself that you've produced, and then you're looking at the market. So understanding what your book is one of the hardest things. It's really difficult for people, after immersing themselves in a book for however long it's taken to write it and edit it, 120,000 words, however long it is, to then step back and say, well, what actually is this? If you've already published the book, actually you've got lots of things to go on in terms of looking at your Amazon reviews, picking out some of the words that come out, both the positive words and maybe some of the critical ones, to see where maybe if the book's not doing as well as you'd like it to be doing, people are being missold, what I was talking about earlier, where they're getting the wrong signals somehow, and making sure that the good bits that people highlight are definitely coming out in things like your title, in your first line of your pitch. Every level of the book description is really leading them on that journey towards buy now, read now. That's the first stage, and that's really about being able to look at your own work. And then the other side of it is to look within the industry. It might be that the authors who are similar to you are picking a different kind of title. They are looking at a different cover. The emotional benefit that they are giving across is being signaled in a more powerful way. So you want to be looking at your book descriptions. The brilliant thing about being indie is, of course, that you can tweak whenever you want to. A lot of publishers put up, conventional mainstream publishers will put up the blurb and they will not touch it from year to year. And of course, as an author, if you're in that contract, you have to ask them to change it for you. Having that ability to do it yourself means you can fiddle around with it. You can say, right, okay, if I'm trying to make a connection to an existing author, have I got an endorsement? Can I use words that are similar to the words that they use in their blurbs? Do I switch it around? Is it actually the setting that might pull people in, where I've been talking more about the protagonist? You're questioning each of those individual things, but you are looking at it from the point of view of your reader rather than you.
Yeah, it's difficult. What about keeping things fresh across a series? Because it would seem like if you've, your emotional promise, once you've decided this is a small town romance, for example, how do you keep that fresh for every book, apart from This Is Another Couple, or, within genre fiction, which is, great selling? How do we do that, keeping it fresh?
When you're writing it, or in the selling, or both?
Well, both. I mean, we're talking here about, indie authors writing book descriptions in terms of that type of pitch. How do we go, right, apart from this is the next one in the series?
I guess that's when I actually come back to why I write a pitch, and why I often encourage people to do that at the beginning of the writing process. Because then if you are in a series, and I've written series, you can start to look at what you are retaining from that first one in terms of that emotional promise and that connection, and what those characters are delivering to the existing readers and potential new ones, and where you might be pushing it in a different direction. So I do talk a bit about all the different possible definitions of what we call stories. Is it 7 basic story types? Is it 100? Is it 2? But I think those archetype stories, which you can read about, and you can find them everywhere, that the hero's journey was what kicked it all off. They give you ideas for what you might be able to do with your characters. Because if you're writing a romance series, and I've done this, women's fiction series, and at the end of book 1, I had a character who had found her true love and we liked her true love. Well, then when it came to writing a second book, because the first book had been so popular, well, what on earth do you do with her? And that's when you go back to the archetypes and you go back to the pitch and you think, well, what might I be doing to this person that is still painful, still puts them into conflict with the world around them, but retains the sense of emotional satisfaction that a romance reader got at the end of book one, where they find Mr. Right. And I think although you are writing perhaps a series, each story structure doesn't have to be identical. The benefits have to be offering a similar thing because you're hoping to take the readers with you, but it doesn't have to be exactly the same story.
No, that's great. And I was just thinking there of a book which didn't, Bridget Jones's Baby, no spoilers for anyone who hasn't read the book or seen the movie, but very, very different.
Yeah.
They decided they wanted to give the same emotional thing for the movie, but the book was completely not that at all. And it didn't, resonate so much with the audience. So, it is really interesting how once readers love what they love, you can't just switch it up.
It's tone. Tone is so vital. It's the Maya Angelou quote. People will not remember what you said, but they'll remember how you made them feel. And I think that's the case with books. I will look at a book cover, even if I can't remember the plot, I'll think, oh yes, I remember how it felt to finish that book, or I have a real sense of the jeopardy or the roller coaster ride it took me on.
No, you're right. Okay, so if people do want to pitch an agent or a publisher with their book, are there any things that you would do differently at that stage than what we've already talked about in terms of an indie author writing a book description, for example?
You are pushing forward a business proposal, really, I always think, in an email. So you are both selling your idea, but you're also selling the concept that you might be fun and profitable to work with. So your query email, if you are getting in touch with an agent, is doing those two things. It is seducing them from that subject line, but it is also saying that you are a professional and you want to enter into a professional and mutually lucrative relationship. So the story is the first thing. I mean, if you are a brilliant person and you are incredibly professional, but your story is hackneyed or it is not interesting or it doesn't have a hook, none of those things matter. But making sure that you have your book described in a really sharp and the most desirable way possible is key, and making sure that you've edited that and read it out loud and printed it off so that there isn't a single error, because agents are very pernickety about these things. That's the first thing. But I think it's also much more important when you're pitching an agent, once you've got this brilliant story idea across to them, to make them see where you think you fit in the market, because you might not be 100% right about that, but just starting to do that by offering things like comp titles, comparator titles. Those are the authors or the books that you think you have similarities to. Those are really important for an agent and a publisher, because they want to know where they might be able to sell in the market, that there is an audience, a readership out there for your book. And that applies really for fiction. For non-fiction, yes, the concept, again, not so much the story question, but the problem that you're solving or the new material that you're bringing to a familiar subject are important. Alongside that, for non-fiction, an agent's dream is to find out that you have some kind of a platform as well, that you've got followers, that you have already done some TV appearances or whatever it is. Of course, the irony of that when it's non-fiction is that if you have that platform already, it's quite an interesting decision as to whether you want to work with an agent or at all, or whether you are better off using that platform directly as an indie.
Yeah, wow. Okay, again, lots I want to come back on. Oh, which one to start with? Let's go with the comp thing. So the comp titles that you mentioned. So what are some tips here? Because I've seen a lot of authors who've gone, oh, my books are like Jane Austen. For fans of Jane Austen, or Dickens or something, and dead famous authors, or, even Umberto Eco or something, dead famous authors. So how famous should one go, and how dead, or even dead, or can it be for, and also I guess there's a lot about ego here. I mean, or can it be for fans of particular films, for example, as well as books?
It's all about being savvy, and I also think having comps that are appropriate, but also maybe a little bit surprising. And that's where you run into problem with dead authors, because often they've been overused, the next Agatha Christie, the next Umberto Eco, whatever it might be. Also, the publishing world has changed so much, and we have no idea whether Agatha Christie, if she were to be published today, would be a bestseller. So that's why more recent titles are a much better bet. But the really successful comp titles become cliches in their own right. So if you say to an agent, oh, my book's the next Gone Girl or the next Girl on the Train, it tells us nothing, because we've heard it so many times before. And another writer that I spoke to about the book was Will Dean, who wrote Dark Pines, which has been really successful, Nordic noir, I think. And when he was pitching agents, he did choose famous authors, but more unusual titles. So to pitch his, he came up with Stephen King's Needful Things meets Gillian Flynn's Sharp Objects. So immediately that is a lot more compelling than, say, Misery meets Gone Girl.
And Sharp Objects was fantastic, far superior in my opinion.
Well, many people have said that, exactly. So you are appealing to an agent's, you're piquing their interest because you're not going for the obvious. You're showing the knowledge of the market and genre, so that shows that you're professional, but you're still using the mega sellers to suggest your book could sell really well. And on the movie and the TV side, I find that generally putting one or two in there, in amongst quite a lot of books, can work. Publishers are naturally a bit suspicious of that. They're a bit wary because they think it is a different world. But you can do it, and I've done it, especially where I think maybe publishing hasn't cottoned on to a potential subject matter yet. So I am the world's biggest fan of medical drama. Okay, they are my guilty pleasure. I watched Grey's Anatomy on I only discovered it about 2 years ago. Watched all 13 series. Love it, and also love the reality stuff, the 24 Hours and A&E. So I've written this book that's going to be conventionally published about. It's set in a medical world, and I included Grey's Anatomy and 24 Hours in A&E alongside some epic love story books in my pitch, because I was trying to say, I don't think there is much fiction for people out there who love those shows. Now, I won't know until 2021 until I'm right, but I took a little bit of a punt there alongside the more conventional titles that I knew editors would recognise.
And that's so I've watched the whole lot of Grey's Anatomy twice.
Oh, okay. You're an even bigger super fan than me.
I am a super fan. Also, you made me think there of, and this is more thriller, but Robin Cook's medical thrillers. Yes. I've pretty much read all of those. Like, I love that, a sub niche as well.
But where are the novels? Where are the Grey's Anatomy novels? There is medical Mills and Boon romance.
I was going to say, there's a lot of romance about it,
but mainstream fiction, not so much. So this is I'm looking for a word. A sort of like if you had chicklit and sicklit, maybe it's not sicklit. I don't know, crosslit, medlit.
No, I think that's fantastic. Do you have a title for that? Do you want to mention it or no?
It's going to be called How to Save a Life.
Oh, so, no, brilliant! That's from the song. It's from
the song, but it is also literally How to Save a Life. So it has actually got the 4 steps that is my bookend, the 4 steps of the chain of survival, which can increase the survival rate from under 10% to 75% from cardiac arrest.
See, that's very clever. And well, you are very clever. I know this, but what's fascinating here? Okay, this is a great example, because that I said immediately, I know that as part of the it's in the song, but of course we can use song titles as covers. We just can't use as titles. We can't use lyrics. Yeah. I mean that is a lyric in the song, but also it's well known enough that that it couldn't be copyrighted, I guess.
Yes, exactly. And it is literally a thing that you can do.
Yes, you can. Well. Yeah. So in my head, as a Grey's Anatomy fan, I get it. So you're
clever. Immediately singing it. It's the earworm now, isn't it? And totally. A very nice earworm it is too.
Although it can't overtake the Witcher earworm, which is totally in my head. Do you know that one?
No, not yet.
Oh, with that now you have to go look at it. Okay. Just Google Witcher earworm, everyone, and it will be stuck in your head. Anyway, back onto the things. Right, so we've done comps. The other thing is that you have mentioned a little bit about saying about your platform. Now, this is also interesting about you, because you write under how many names? And I mean, lots of names per genre.
Yes.
So, and I do, obviously, and I've also considered pitching for a traditional publishing under another name because my name has become synonymous with indie. So where is the balance between starting again with another pen name, as you have multiple times, or using the platforms we already have?
It's a really difficult decision, and I don't actually know if I've done the right thing. So the new love story is going to have a completely different name. My thrillers have retained my first name but a different surname. I think that a lot of my decision and a publisher's decision around this new one was to do with algorithms, in that if you put in Kate Harrison to Amazon, you're going to get my diet books first. And so I've almost decided that is now, although my previous women's fiction was under that name, that is almost more my non-fiction name now. And you can still, though, if you decide that it's too complicated, and it may be that I live to regret having all these different names, I'm not sure, you can just tweak your bio for different things. So I do this, and we can all do that. When you're looking at a bio, people think, I'm going to have to expose everything about myself. But actually, it's about picking and choosing the things that resonate with readers who are going to like the particular genre of book that they're looking at. They want to feel a kind of a connection with you as an author. Not all of them do. Some of them just want the book. But increasingly, with us living our lives online and so on, it helps for them to feel that there's a reason why you wrote that book and no one else could have. So I don't know if you're writing a comic mummy lit book, it really helps them to know that you are a mother of 5 under 10s. If you are writing dark thrillers, which I do some of the time, then I totally upped the side of my career, which was in courtroom reporting and writing a TV script about a serial killer. You can pick and choose. We've all got really interesting lives, and we can pick the bits and also write them tonally so that they match the tone of the book. And it doesn't have to be a career thing. It's quite relevant because I mentioned How to Save a Life. When we were pitching that book, in the bio, we did mention the fact that this whole book was inspired by having to give CPR to a family member and it working. That's what I had to do a few years ago. And I wrote the novel off the back of that. It took me ages to do it. But I think because of that, we're going to mention that in the bio because it's very powerful. It explains why I'm doing it, explains why it matters to me. And when we had people's responses after we sent the book out with that bio, almost all of them, when they came back, said, you know what, the first thing I wanted to do after closing the book, after putting down the tissues, was to find a first aid course near me. So if you can find different ways, even within fiction, of making it connected to your real life or the reader's real life, it has an impact.
That's fantastic. I think that book's going to do super well. I'm going to read it.
I hope so.
And then, well, there's lots we could talk about, but one last question, which is I did a great course at the Screenwriters School in London. And one thing they talked about with pitching is there's the pitcher and there's the catcher. And if we just concentrate on the pitcher, which is us, we will miss, because we also have to think about the catcher, the person on the other side. So whether that's the reader or whether that is an agent or a particular publisher that we have in mind or something like that. So how, like you clearly, you've done so well with everything you've done because you have pitched things to the right people. So how do we work that out? Like if people do want to pitch, whether it be, Audible for an Audible original or, or an agent, how do we look for the right kind of people to catch our pitch?
It is so much easier than it used to be when I started out, when hardly any agents were online. When I was pitching my book back in 2002, you still sent queries through the mail, and agents looked at the internet and giving any interviews or even having much direct contact with would-be authors as being a really scary and stupid thing to do. Now they're out there. So there is so much information that you can find. You can listen to podcasts, you can research specific shows. So once you've got your comp titles or your comp shows, find out who represents those, which editors have edited those. If you're looking for a conventional publishing deal, you can really use the information that's out there to start to target that and to build a dialogue in some cases. I mean, you won't always be able to do that, because if you're pitching an idea, an agent may only come back to you if you are of interest, if that particular project is of interest. But if you are doing things like going to conferences or participating in online pitch competitions on Twitter or other materials, other social media, you can start to get a sense that the things I mentioned before, like looking at Hollywood Reporter, looking at the bookseller online, you do require subscriptions after a certain level. But if you're doing it on a regular basis, you can still get access to so much of that information for free. And then you can start, just writing those lists down. Keep a list of a book that has sold recently that you think, actually, there's something about that that's similar to mine, without it then becoming a direct competitor title, because an agent or a publisher is not going to publish a book that is so similar or sell a book that is so similar that it puts them in competition with another client. But looking for that information. And when it comes to readers, one of the really interesting people that I interviewed in the book, and I've known her for ages, is Susie Quinn, who has written across loads of genres. And she is the queen at this, understanding what readers want by going to them, engaging with them on Twitter, on Facebook. Her first book was actually inspired by going into Amazon and typing in erotica and waiting to see what it suggested. And this is way back in 2012, around the time 50 Shades was doing well, and just finding out what people wanted to read about erotica wise. That was a really early adopter of kind of audience insight. And now she just engages with them all the time, and even changes her book, even changes her titles, the writing itself, based on what the Amazon reviews say.
Wow, so much to think about, and absolutely recommend your book, Pitch Power. And where can people find you and all your pen names and everything you do online?
All my pen names. Who knows whether there'll even be a new one by this time next year. So my website is kate-harrison.com. You can find everything about me. I've got a cheat sheet on titles to download, and all about my pen names. But you can also find me Twitter and Instagram at Kate Writes Books.
Fantastic. Thanks so much for your time, Kate. That was great.
Thank you. It's been a real pleasure.
So I hope you found the discussion with Kate super useful today, and that it gave you some things to think about around your pitch, however you want to publish, whether you want to get an agent, go with traditional publishing, or go indie. And if you're already out there like me, you're thinking about how to improve your process. So I hope it was useful. And obviously let me know, tweet me at The Creative Penn, or leave a comment on the show notes, and that will be cool. In the next show, I'll be talking about empowering authors around copyright with Rebecca Giblin, and we will be discussing some studies that she has done on the publishing industry, what publishing clauses to watch out for, why copyright is so important for authors, and we discuss the inevitable impact of AI on copyright, since Rebecca and I geek out around tech and copyright. So that is coming next week. In the meantime, remember to register for the Scrivener webinar. If you want to join me, you can go to thecreativeprenn.com/Jan30, JAN30, and you will be able to join us for that webinar. Happy writing, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for listening today. I hope you found it helpful. You might also like the backlist episodes and show notes, available at thecreativepenn.com/podcast. You can also get your free author blueprint at thecreativepenn.com/blueprint. If you'd like to connect, you can tweet me at The Creative Penn or find me on Facebook at The Creative Penn. See you next time.